Dense fog blanketed Norfolk's military harbor as Sarah Mitchell adjusted her backpack on her shoulder. At 28, she had learned to carry more than just military equipment. The weight of her family's frustrated expectations was something she carried daily, invisible, but ever present. Her father, Robert Mitchell, a successful businessman in Chicago, had never hidden his disappointment when she chose to enlist in the United States Navy instead of attending law school as he had planned for her since childhood. The last time Sarah had been home 3 months ago, the argument had been devastating. Her father had looked at her with those cold eyes she knew so well and uttered the words that still echoed in her mind every night: a disgrace to the family. He had said it in front of her younger sibling, her mother who remained silent, and her grandparents who were visiting for Thanksgiving. Sarah had served her country for 6 years, participated in 3 international missions. But to Robert Mitchell, she was just a daughter who had wasted her potential and tarnished the family name by choosing a life he considered inferior. Sarah walked through the narrow corridors of the naval base, greeting passing colleagues. Few really knew what she did beyond her official duties as a communications specialist. She had learned from a young age to keep certain things to herself. Growing up in a family where appearances were more important than truth had taught Sarah the value of silence. But the silence she maintained now had nothing to do with shame or fear of judgment. It was a necessary, strategic, and vital silence. For the past 3 years, Sarah had used every penny of her salary that didn't go towards basic necessities on a project no one in her family knew about. She had discovered, through a childhood friend who worked in social services, a program that helped families of fallen soldiers. Not just with the official benefits the government provided, but with everyday needs that fell through the cracks of bureaucracy. Children who needed school supplies, spouses struggling to pay rent while waiting for benefits to be processed, families facing eviction because their main salary had suddenly disappeared. Sarah had started discreet, $50 here, $100 there. But she soon realized she could do more. She began organizing other military personnel on the base, creating an informal support network. No one knew she was the one coordinating everything. She operated through anonymous emails, left envelopes with money in mailboxes, organized deliveries of food and clothing without ever revealing her identity. To the beneficiaries, she was just an anonymous angel. To the donors she recruited, she was just someone with a big heart who preferred to remain behind the scenes. Work consumed almost all of her free time. After 12-hour shifts monitoring naval communications, Sarah spent her nights answering desperate emails, making calls to connect resources with needs, organizing volunteers for home repairs or transportation. She had learned to sleep only 4 or 5 hours a night. Coffee became her best friend, and the dark circles under her eyes testified to the hours she dedicated to helping people who would never know her name. But it wasn't just about money and logistics. Sarah had a special gift that few knew about. She spent entire weekends visiting widows and widowers of military personnel, sitting in quiet living rooms, listening to stories about lost loves, holding trembling hands, simply offering her presence. She played with children who would never see their parents again, helped with homework, took confused teenagers out for ice cream, and listened as they expressed anger and pain. Sarah had a rare ability to be present without judgment, to offer comfort without empty platitudes. Her own family pain had made her sensitive to the pain of others. She understood what it meant to feel invisible, unvalued, misunderstood. Every time her father had ignored her at family events, every sarcastic comment about her career choice, every unfavorable comparison to her siblings who had followed more traditional paths, all of this had shaped Sarah into someone deeply empathetic. She channeled her own rejection into radical acceptance of others. The project grew beyond her wildest expectations. In 3 years, the informal network Sarah had built had helped over 200 families. She had coordinated the delivery of tons of food, organized repairs on dozens of homes, provided transportation for countless medical appointments and legal matters. She had held babies while exhausted mothers slept for the first time in weeks. She had painted nurseries, assembled furniture, mowed lawns, and prepared meals. And through it all, she remained completely anonymous. Sarah kept meticulous records on an encrypted laptop that never left her room. She documented every family helped, every donation received and distributed, every hour of volunteer service coordinated, not for pride or future recognition, but because her military training had taught her the importance of accuracy and accountability. She knew that every dollar counted, that every hour mattered, and she wanted to ensure that no resources were wasted. But the personal cost was high. Sarah rarely went out with friends. She had given up on romantic relationships because she simply didn't have the time or emotional energy left. Her calls home became increasingly rare, especially after that last argument. Her mother called occasionally, brief and uncomfortable conversations where neither of them mentioned the elephant in the room. Her brothers had stopped calling altogether, loyal to their father in a way that Sarah understood, but still hurt. There were moments of deep doubt, nights when Sarah wondered if she was making the right choice. Maybe her father was right. Maybe she should have gone to law school, should have become the successful corporate lawyer he had envisioned. She could be earning 6 figures now, living in a fancy apartment, impressing her family at dinner parties. But then she thought of the last widow she had visited, a 32-year-old woman with 3 young children, trying to figure out how to go on after losing her husband in an operation in the Middle East. She thought of the relief on that woman's face when Sarah had shown up with groceries and an anonymous check to cover that month's rent, and Sarah knew she was exactly needed to be. The morning began like any other. Sarah was at her workstation, monitoring routine transmissions, when she received an unexpected message. General Marcus Thornton wanted to see her in his office immediately. Sarah felt a pang in her stomach. General Thornton was a legend in the Navy, a man with 40 years of service, decorated multiple times, universally respected. He rarely summoned lower-ranking personnel for personal meetings. Sarah tried to think if she had made some mistake in her work, but she couldn't imagine what. The general's office was exactly as Sarah had expected. Organized, efficient, walls covered with certificates and photographs from decades of service. The general was a tall man, with military-cut gray hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to see right through people. He gestured for Sarah to sit down, and she obeyed, maintaining the perfect posture she had been trained to. What happened next left Sarah completely unprepared. The general didn't ask about her work. Instead, he opened a folder on his desk and began to read. Every family Sarah had helped in the last 3 years. Every anonymous donation. Every hour of volunteer service. Every silent visit to a grieving home. Everything was documented there. Somehow, Sarah couldn't comprehend. She felt the blood drain from her face as she realized her secret had been discovered. The general calmly explained that the Navy had departments that monitored unusual activity, not out of suspicion, but for security. When a service member's financial and behavioral patterns changed dramatically, discreet investigations were conducted. In Sarah's case, what they discovered was nothing sinister, but something extraordinary. A young officer using virtually all her personal resources and time to help the families of fallen service members, all done in complete anonymity, without any pursuit of recognition or career advancement. Sarah had expected a reprimand. Perhaps there were regulations she had inadvertently violated. Perhaps her obsession with helping others had somehow hampered her official performance in ways she hadn't realized. But General Thornton simply looked at her with an expression Sarah couldn't quite decipher. There was respect there, even admiration, but also something deeper. The general told Sarah a story she had never heard before. He had lost his own younger brother in combat 25 years ago. His brother's widow, his sister-in-law, had been left with 2 young children and almost no support. The general, then just a young officer, had tried to help, but he was stationed overseas and could only send money. He had watched from a distance as his sister-in-law fought, as his nieces grew up without a father, as the system that was supposed to protect the families of fallen soldiers repeatedly failed to provide the necessary support at the right time. That experience had shaped the general's entire subsequent career. He had become a tireless advocate within the armed forces for better family support programs. He had fought for policy changes, for more resources, for more responsive systems, but he knew that bureaucracies moved slowly, and that even the best official programs could never meet all individual needs. What Sarah had done, creating an informal and agile network that could respond immediately to real needs, was exactly what he had longed to see for decades. But there was more. General Thornton was retiring in 3 months, and he had decided to use his retirement ceremony to do something unprecedented. He wanted to introduce Sarah Mitchell to the public, tell her story, and officially establish the program she had informally built as a formal nonprofit organization. He had already spoken with other high-ranking officers, secured institutional support, and even contacted private philanthropic organizations interested in providing significant initial funding. Sarah was stunned. She tried to protest, explaining that she didn't want recognition, that she had done all this simply because it was the right thing to do, but the general was gently firm. It wasn't about personal recognition, he explained. It was about scaling the impact. As an informal and anonymous operation, Sarah was limited by her own time and resources. As an official organization with institutional support and adequate funding, she could help thousands instead of hundreds. She could create a model that other military bases across the country could replicate. She could transform lives on a scale she could never achieve alone. He gave Sarah time to process. The ceremony was in 10 weeks. She didn't need to decide immediately, but he hoped she would carefully consider not only what she wanted, but what the families she had dedicated years to helping needed. Sometimes, he said, true courage wasn't in remaining in the shadows, but in stepping into the light when it could serve a greater purpose. Sarah left the general's office in a state of shock. She spent the following days in a fog, automatically fulfilling her military obligations while her mind raced. The idea of making her work public, of having her name associated with it, made every fiber of her being recoil. She had built her entire adult life around silent service. Her father's approval had always been conditional on public and visible success. She had found peace by completely rejecting that paradigm, by finding meaning in actions that no one would see or applaud. But she couldn't deny the logic of the general's argument. With adequate resources, a real organizational structure, and official support, she could help so many other families. Children who would never know their fathers could receive scholarships. Widows and widowers could receive counseling and vocational training. Families on the verge of financial collapse could receive intervention before it was too late. The potential impact was staggering. Sarah began calling the people she had helped over the years. Careful conversations where she revealed for the first time that she had been the one behind the anonymous support they had received. The reactions were uniformly emotional. Tears, gratitude, hugs over the phone line. But Sarah asked each person the same question. If she made this work public, if she turned it into a real organization that could help many more families, would they support it even if it meant she would no longer be anonymous? Each person said yes immediately. More than that, they wanted to help. Widows whom Sarah had supported years before offered to share their stories. Children of fallen soldiers, now teenagers and young adults, volunteered. The network that Sarah had so carefully built in secrecy was ready to emerge into the light and grow exponentially. But there was one conversation Sarah dreaded more than any other. She needed to call her family, not to ask for permission or approval, but because she knew the ceremony would be reported in the news. High-ranking military officials would be present. There would be media coverage. Her family would find out anyway, and Sarah preferred they hear it from her first, no matter how difficult that conversation might be. She called on a Sunday evening, knowing the family would likely be gathered for dinner as was their custom. Her mother answered, surprised and clearly nervous to hear Sarah's voice. It had been months since they last spoke. Sarah asked to speak to her father, and there was a long pause before Robert Mitchell took the phone. His voice was cold, formal, the tone he used with business associates he didn't particularly like, but with whom he needed to maintain professional relationships. Sarah told him everything about the last 3 years, about the families she had helped, about the network she had built, about General Thornton and the planned ceremony. She kept her voice steady, factual, not asking anything of him, but simply informing him because he was her father and she felt he deserved to know. When she finished, there was a long silence on the line. When Robert Mitchell finally spoke, His voice had a quality Sarah couldn't quite place. He asked questions. How many families exactly? How much money had she personally contributed? How many hours a week did she dedicate to it? The questions continued, detailed and precise in the way Robert always approached any situation. Sarah answered them all honestly, without embellishing or minimizing. Then Robert Mitchell said something Sarah never expected to hear. He said he needed time to process it. It wasn't approval, but it also wasn't the condemnation Sarah had anticipated. He hung up without saying goodbye properly, but Sarah hadn't expected anything different. She had done her duty to inform him. What he did with that information was beyond her control. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. General Thornton insisted that Sarah be involved in every aspect of planning the new organization. They worked on an organizational structure. They recruited a board of directors composed of retired military officers, social service specialists, and people who had lost family members in combat. They established strict financial guidelines and transparency protocols. Sarah insisted that every penny be traceable, that the organization operate to the highest ethical standards. The name they chose was Silent Service Family Foundation. It was a double reference. In naval jargon, silent service usually referred to the submarine force, but in this context, it represented the silent service Sarah had provided and the organization's commitment to serving those who silently served in grief and hardship. Sarah liked it because it retained the essence of what she had done while looking forward to what could be achieved. The military media began picking up the story as the ceremony approached. Profiles were written about Sarah, though she declined most interviews. Those she did accept focused exclusively on the families the organization would serve, not on herself. She consistently redirected the focus away from her own actions to the needs that still existed, to the gaps that still needed to be filled. 3 days before the ceremony, Sarah received an unexpected phone call. It was her mother, and her voice was strained with emotion. Her father wanted to come to the ceremony. He wanted to bring the whole family. Sarah was silent for a long moment, not trusting herself to speak without her voice breaking. Her mother continued, explaining that Robert had spent weeks doing his own discreet investigation, contacting some of the families Sarah had helped, verifying every detail Sarah had shared. Not because he doubted her, her mother hastened to add, but because that was how he processed anything significant. Sarah told her mother it would be good to see them, and it was true. But she also knew she no longer depended on their approval. She had found something more valuable than family validation. She had found purpose, meaning, and the profound satisfaction of knowing that her life mattered in tangible and measurable ways. The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and cold. Sarah wore her dress uniform, each emblem and decoration polished to a gleam. She had been promoted to lieutenant 2 months prior, a recognition of her outstanding performance in her official duties that had nothing to do with her volunteer work. As she entered the auditorium where the ceremony would be held, she saw hundreds of faces, military officers in full uniform, families she had helped over the years, media representatives, and there in the back she saw her father, her mother, her 2 younger brothers all seated together. General Thornton gave a speech that brought more than half the audience to tears. He spoke of sacrifice, of service, of the true meaning of honor. He spoke of young men and women who gave their lives for their country, and of the families who continued to pay the price of that sacrifice long after the headlines faded. He spoke of how the system, however good it might be, could never capture all individual needs, all specific crises. Then he told the story of Sarah Mitchell, a young officer who had chosen to serve not only in her official military, but in every free moment she had, who had donated not only money but time, energy, and presence, who had built a network of care and support that had transformed hundreds of lives, who had done all this without seeking any recognition, without any expectation of reward, simply because she saw a need and felt compelled to act. When the general called Sarah to the stage, the applause was deafening. She walked with the upright posture that military training had taught her, but inside, she trembled. On stage, the general presented her with a civilian commendation, an official recognition of her extraordinary service. But more significantly, he officially launched the Silent Service Family Foundation, announcing initial funding of $2 million from private donors and institutional commitments from various military and veterans organizations. Sarah was invited to say a few words. She had prepared a short speech, but standing there looking at that sea of faces, she forgot the carefully chosen words. Instead, she spoke from the heart. She spoke of the honor of knowing families who demonstrated extraordinary courage every day simply by continuing amidst unthinkable loss. She spoke of children whose resilience humbled her. She spoke of widows and widowers who found ways to rebuild lives that had been shattered. She said that anything she had done was insignificant compared to the sacrifice of those who had lost and those who continued to serve despite the loss. And then she looked to the back of the auditorium where her family was seated, and she said something she hadn't planned. She said she had grown up believing that value came from visible achievement, from public recognition, from status and success as society generally defined them. But her military service had taught her a different lesson. Real value, she said, came from living according to principles, even when no one was watching, from doing the right thing, even when there was no applause, from serving causes greater than one's own ego. Robert Mitchell watched his daughter on stage, this remarkable human being whom he had consistently misunderstood and underestimated. He thought of all the times he had pushed his children toward markers of success that he understood, titles, and prestige. He thought of how he had raged when Sarah chose a different path, how he had interpreted her choice as a rejection of everything he valued. Now, sitting there listening to story after story of lives his daughter had touched, of families she had supported through their darkest moments, Robert Mitchell confronted an uncomfortable truth. His daughter had achieved something infinitely more significant than anything he himself had accomplished in his 40-year career in business. She had made a real difference in ways that would last for generations. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Sarah was surrounded by people wanting to thank her, wanting to share stories, wanting to offer support to the new foundation. She navigated it all with grace, but her eyes kept searching for her family in the crowd. Finally, she saw them, still huddled together near the exit, as if they weren't sure whether to stay or leave. Sarah walked over to them, and for the first time in years, it was her father who spoke first. He didn't say he was proud, though that was clear in his red eyes. Instead, he said he was wrong about everything, about what constituted success, about what made a life worthwhile, about his daughter. And then, this man who rarely showed physical emotion pulled Sarah into a hug she hadn't received from him since she was a little girl. Her mother wept openly. Her brothers, now young adults in their 20s, looked at her with newfound respect and something akin to admiration. The family spent the next hour truly talking, perhaps for the first time in years, not about superficialities or performative achievements, but about real things, about what mattered, about the meaning of purpose and contribution. Robert Mitchell inquired about the new foundation, and when Sarah explained the plan, he made an unexpected offer. His company could provide pro bono financial consulting. He personally wanted to establish a significant annual donation. He knew other business people who might be interested in supporting this cause. For the first time, father and daughter found common ground, a shared mission that transcended their long-standing differences. In the following months, the Silent Service Family Foundation grew beyond the expectations of even the most optimistic. Chapters were established on 8 different military bases. Thousands of volunteers signed up. Millions of dollars were raised. But Sarah insisted on maintaining the essence of what had made her original work effective: personal response, attention to individual needs, genuine human connection. Sarah continued serving in the Navy, but now divided her time between her official duties and leading the foundation. It was exhausting, but she had never felt more alive, more aligned with her purpose. And her relationship with her family, while still complicated in some ways, had been fundamentally transformed. They didn't agree on everything, but there was now mutual respect and understanding that multiple paths could lead to meaningful lives. A year after the ceremony, Sarah visited the grave of a young soldier whose children she had helped years before. The widow, now rebuilding her life with continued support from the foundation, had joined her. They stood together in silence, paying their respects to a man who had given everything. And Sarah thought about how strange paths could be. She had been called a disgrace, rejected, and misunderstood. But in staying true to her own values, in serving quietly without seeking validation, she had eventually found something more precious than family approval. She had found peace within herself, empathy and meaning in serving something greater than any individual recognition could provide.